Thank you very much, Mark. It's an honor to be here with Ambassador Barcena and the other speakers today for this very important topic of Mexico. Country of nearly 128 million people. It's a country with which we share a 2,000-mile border and much history and an interconnected future. I can think of no country really that is more important for the future of our own country, especially in a world today that is breaking up into regions. I'll be talking about that a little more toward the end of my remarks. Our region, North America, will be increasingly important to our country and to the future of both of our countries. 1 million people cross this border every day. It's an estimated 1.5 million Americans who actually live in Mexico today. 36 million of our citizens are of Mexican origin. 25% of them are actually citizens. And as I say, this is a fateful relationship in a world of migrants. The human species is a migrating species. We are all migrants, all of us. And over the past 500 years, the settlement of what they call the New World from Europe, a very important aspect of this was a treaty in 1494, the Treaty of Tordesillas, in which Spain and Portugal divided up their expansion. You can see here why Brazil became Portuguese. And as the citizens of Europe flowed into the New World, Mexico had a very long head start on the United States. Mexico City, for the past 500 years, most of the past 500 years, has been the largest city in the New World. It's an amazing city. So many of us go to Cancun and other places. Mexico City is one of the most culturally vibrant and interesting cities that I know of. It's full of treasures. It's museums, amazing neighborhoods, cultural sites. One of my very favorites is near the Zocalo, the main square of Mexico City. It's the oldest printing press in the New World, from 1524, when our country was still kind of struggling to get our orientation. Mexico was far ahead. From 1522, well, by the way, as an example of the cultural vibrancy, I just wanted to slip this in, because the fact that the past 5 Best Directory Awards at the Academy Awards, 4 of them have gone to Mexican directors, which I think is quite something. Alfonso Cuarón for Gravity in 2013, Alejandro Iñárritu for Birdman, and then for The Revenant, and most recently Guillermo del Toro for Shape of Water. So this is just an example of the vibrancy to our south, and which is a part of all of our lives. But as I say, Mexico had a long head start. From 1522, we had the Viceroyalty of Mexico. You can see this is a very extensive empire at the time. In 1821, it became Mexico. It became an independent country in 1821. But for centuries, these had been the boundaries of this empire in the New World. And of course, as the United States expanded, and with our manifest destiny theology, and with our Monroe Doctrine, suzerainty, if you will, to our south, we expanded in a war with Mexico in 1846, leading to the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo. We basically seized half of the territory of this long-standing political entity. And of course, that has sort of set the tone. Our expansion across the vast space of the Americas, has its moments like that. When the Mexican Revolution broke out in 1910, which was a very fateful turned in the Republic of Mexico. We, of course, intervened on several occasions. When the dust settled, you had a political party, the Institutional Revolutionary Party, or PRI, which settled in as as really the dominant party of Mexico, really up until the 1990s. I think you could call this a centralized, presidential, corporatist, one-party system, by and large. The PRI is still around, but its influence began to collapse in about 2000. Now, during the early part of the century, the relations between our two countries were regulated. Two particularly important programs. The Maquiladora Program during World War II, when we did not have enough workers in the agricultural sector, and temporary workers were brought in on a regulated basis to work in the United States. This program lasted until 1964, and is really an adumbration of the kind of interaction we have across the border today. The other program that I think is sort of points to the future was the Maquiladora Program. Industrial zones began to spring up in northern Mexico with U.S. capital investment. By the 1980s, this was a very important part of the Mexican economy. In fact, it accounted for 1/2 of all exports. And to this day, this northern part of Mexico is more developed. The rural southern parts are still coming on. So these programs were very important in the history between our two countries. Today, the political landscape in Mexico is much more complex. The PAN Party, the National Action Party, founded in 1939, finally broke through in 2000, breaking the grip of the PRI. Vicente Fox, elected in 2000, and then Felipe Calderon in 2006. The PRI came back, but now, for the first time, there's another movement. PAN was to the right of the PRI, the Morena Party, the National Regeneration Movement of Andres Manuel Lopez Obrador, or AMLO as he's called, won the most recent election. So this is very new for Mexico, and for our relationship. A lot of people wondered how will this work out to have a movement that has not really been in charge in Mexico suddenly come in. And so we had the transition from the PRI, from Enrique Peña Nieto to AMLO. This is how the Trump administration welcomed this new president, with his beloved daughter, and with Mike Pence. Trump himself didn't go, but actually there's been amazingly good rapport between Trump and Lopez Obrador since he was elected. Now, there are two issues among the many things going on between our countries that dominate right now, as we all know. One is immigration, and the other is trade. So I'll talk about each of those briefly. The immigration tensions we see now are not unique to this region. It's worldwide. This is how The Economist a year or two ago sort of sketched it out. And many countries right now are trying to decide how open they are. It's kind of becoming a dividing line in world politics. As you can see, the U.S. immigration has varied over the years. We slammed the door starting in the 1920s, in 1924, a very restrictive Immigration Act that had a national origins provision, basically saying we welcome Northwest Europeans. It's really what that immigration legislation said. And it continued in force until the mid-60s, when the new immigration law opened up. It was probably part of the civil rights movement, if you will, opened us up to immigration. And you can see there's been tremendous growth since then. When we got to 14% foreign-born earlier in the 20th century, a reaction set in. We're up to that level again. Many countries have far higher percentages of foreign-born than we do. There's no reason why this should be an issue. But we do see the tensions around us. Here you can see the pattern of Hispanic migration into the United States. It's very interesting that some of the regions that have the highest proportion of Hispanics are those very regions that we seized from Mexico in the mid-19th century. We are slamming the door. I won't go into detail about President Trump's various statements. You've all read them, you know what's going on. But the concrete results are a slamming of the door, especially to refugees. We've just announced that there'll be 18,000 refugees allowed in the coming year. Under the Trump administration, roughly half of the stated number have come in. So we're probably looking at 9,000 or 10,000 total. Much of the immigration, of course, is coming out from the Northern Triangle, from Guatemala, Honduras, El Salvador, coming on what they call the Beast, the train that crosses Mexico up to our border. And you've seen the scenes of people being detained, families being separated. In a way, we're following the European playbook. After the big influx in 2015 in Europe, two things happened. Number one, the Europeans basically turned their eye away from the suffering of people trying to get across the Mediterranean. Boats sinking, people dying. It was a graphic demonstration to any immigrant, maybe you shouldn't make the trip, right? And I think that's what these scenes are also doing. The intent is to dissuade people from coming. The other thing that the Europeans did right away was to work with countries like Turkey, with third countries, to try to cooperate in keeping the immigrants in their country or sending them back. And of course, we're doing that now, probably with Mexico, also with El Salvador and others. But in the midst of this, people lose sight of the fact that immigration from Mexico is actually declining. There's a surge coming out of the Northern Triangle, but if you look at the statistics, starting in 2010, immigration from Mexico stabilized and then began going down, especially after 2014. There's a net loss now of immigrants from Mexico, which I think is quite significant. In addition, the profile of many Mexicans coming up now has shifted. More college-educated people are coming in. So there are big shifts going on in this relationship. One thing that does affect Mexicans in the U.S., of course, is the DREAM Act. This was proposed by George W. Bush. He couldn't get it through Congress. It failed. Obama tried to revivify it. He took parts of it and called it DACA, D-A-C-A, the Deferred Action for Children and Childhood Arrivals. The problem is he did this by executive order. There's no two-thirds majority in Congress for any of this, as George W. Bush also saw. We're a very divided country. And so DACA is up in the air. In 2017, the Trump administration announced that they would stop the program. That's been held up in the courts. And on November 12th, the Supreme Court will take this up. And we'll see how this DACA, because there are hundreds of thousands of young people of foreign birth who are caught up in this situation. And as I said, the relationship with Lopez Obrador has been good, actually, and there's a lot of cooperation. Mexico is setting up a National Guard and deploying at the border. Trump mentioned this at the UN, very complimenting Lopez Obrador. And on the drug trade, there's been no major change with the new administration in Mexico, still cooperation going on, still a big problem, obviously, for both countries. Now, in the midst of all this, the U.S. image in Mexico has taken a huge hit. As you can see here, just since 2015 or so, we're down to about 30%. It's fallen further in Mexico than in any country in the world. Here's kind of how the rest of the world sees it. I find it interesting that the Russians, who were ecstatic about Trump in 2017, have gone back down. If you look at that last image there. Now, trade very briefly. NAFTA started with George H.W. Bush. It was signed by Clinton. It led to vast increases in trade. Here you can see each state's biggest import trading partner. One of the key aspects is that a lot of the things coming in from Mexico and from Canada are intermediate goods. These are things that are very important for the whole production cycle, supply chains and beyond. So look, up in our region, we're 60% dependent on that kind of intermediate imports from Canada. If you go down to Texas and Arizona, 40%. Our two economies are interlinked. There's no way around it. And in the midst of this, until recently, China and then Canada were our number one trading partners. For the first 6 months of this year, Mexico is. For the first time since 1811, this is really significant, and this is likely to continue as Mexico, and of course this is partly because of the tariffs on China. Now, I want to just briefly mention the prism in Washington right now is China, 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 China. You know, we're urging all of our allies to toe the line, pull back from China. President Trump said at the World Economic Forum last year, we will no longer accept state-run economies. And we're enforcing that with our allies. So when the new NAFTA was signed, it contained a provision, Article 3210, if you look at number 4, entry by any party into a free trade agreement with a non-market economy shall allow the other parties to terminate the agreement. So you have to notify them in 6 months. Now, this is not being enforced yet. I mean, I can't believe that Canada and Mexico have really traded away there because this goes beyond the trade agreement with this kind of provision. But it's an example of how we are trying now to push China back. We've declared that our national security strategy was a mistake to bring them into the economy. In the first place, the Chief Technology Officer, Michael Kratsios, gave a speech earlier this month, in which he said, China is moving ahead in AI and in quantum. And this is the challenge. This is the core of what's happening with China. It's not so much trade, it's tech. Because these have national security implications. So we're pushing Huawei out. We're asking countries like Mexico not to go with Huawei. China has these enormous infrastructure programs going around the world. We feel challenged by this. China is developing its region. The European Union is developing its region with infrastructure. We are not. Neither at home nor in our own region are we doing what the rest of the world is doing. And in fact, you know, George W. Bush's first visit as president was to Mexico. President Obama's first visit was to Canada. Trump's first visit was to Saudi Arabia. And, you know, we are still investing our blood and our treasure in that part of the world. It's estimated this may end up costing us about $6 trillion rather, and we're still in Afghanistan, a lonely mission. The U.S. Army issued its official history of the Iraq War earlier this year, 2 volumes, in the works for years, and concluded that the only victor from the Iraq War was Iran. Now, if that doesn't tell us something about our priorities in recent times, and we have to rethink, especially since the rest of the world is heading in this more regionalized direction. We've got to focus on our own region. And I would think that we would have enough information at our disposal now. And actually, we're pushing in this direction by trying to push China out of the supply chains. We're de facto setting the stage for a greater focus on our region, which I think will be a most welcome development and will be worthy of the history, the rich history that exists between our 2 countries. But thank you very much. Ambassador Ross Wilson.